Radio with Phil Dobbie.
Yes, welcome. It's another Balls Radio. Some very useful numbers and a bit of idle speculation about how quickly everyone should get back to work today. We're calling it You've Had Your Fun, Now Get Back to Work, because that does sort of seem to be the sense, doesn't it, that we're hearing now. We all have to get serious, get back to work. If you die, so be it. It's for the good of the economy. But look, I'm doing this mainly actually just checking in on Balls Radio, just in case you thought I'd become another COVID-19 statistic, which I haven't. But I'm aware that, Balls Radio listeners might be concerned because we haven't had one for a few weeks. And the news today, even Piers Morgan is showing that he's got signs of having it, apparently. He's having difficulty breathing because it's very difficult to breathe when you're too busy talking over people, isn't it? So it may actually be a false positive in that case. But look, I am fine, but concerned that there does seem to be this push to get people back to work. I'm concerned mainly because, and I'm sure this is the same for a lot of other people, I haven't finished all the DIY around the house. Right now, I've peeled off the wallpaper all along from the grand entrance to the Dobbie home, right along the corridor, all the way along the corridor to the east wing. I've replaced a lot of render that came off when because, it's a badly done job. I pulled the wallpaper off. A whole load of render came off as well. So I've plugged that up, replastered, only partially sanded it down. The house is now covered in dust. I'm concerned that there will be other people who are at the same stage, still got all the sanding to finish off, and then you've got to wash it all down with sugar soap before you do the painting. It's going to be at least 3 coats of paint. Days of work still ahead, and I'm sure there's lots of other people halfway through similarly intricate DIY projects. Can you imagine if the government now said, that's it, you've got to go back to work? Having embarked on big home projects, we need more notice than just get back to... We need months now. And it's worse because DIY shops have reopened, which is handy, but it does make the problem worse because we're now getting other stuff so we can embark on even bigger DIY projects. Then they want the garden centres to open, so we've got all the work outside we're going to start on. We will not have time to work. Have they considered that? On the other side, obviously, we do want the economy to survive somehow so that... so that the DIY shops and garden centres can stay open so we can continue on these projects. And, at some point we do have to earn a living, don't we? But 2 factors to consider in all of this. One of them is this from David Icke. I think it's worth listening to this.
It's about the fact that I'm saying there is no evidence been scientifically produced that COVID-19 exists.
Yeah. Right.
I've come to this conclusion not from sitting in the dark, but by looking at the opinions and the evidence of medical professionals that would never get on the BBC or CNN or even close.
I wonder why that would be. So no COVID-19. It's a massive conspiracy theory, even though in the middle of April, about 12,000 more people are dying in the UK than had died in the same week for the last 5 years on average. That's a 112% increase. More than double, in other words, for something that doesn't exist. It's a conspiracy. Of course, when David Icke spouts this stuff on Facebook and YouTube, he gets upset because he gets blocked, which he's taking as a sign that he's onto something. That there's it's a massive conspiracy all around the world. To give it some perspective, David Icke is the man who believed, he used to be a sports commentator on the BBC. Now he believes that shape-shifting reptilian humanoids from the Alpha Draconis star system are hiding in underground bases, and many of the world's leaders are related to these shape-shifting reptiles, like the Rothschilds, the Bush family, and the British royal family. So if you believe, Lizard Man, COVID-19 doesn't exist, if you believe the numbers, we're seeing a massive spike in deaths. And look, we'll get more on his conspiracy theory in a moment, just for a bit of light relief more than anything. The bigger concern is, when do we all go back to work? And my concern is that we're going to do it too quickly. And there seems to be a big push from what would seem sensible, right-minded people. So, like, for example, and I don't want to speak badly of this man because I quite like his stuff. There's a guy called John Ashcroft. who calls himself the Saturday Economist. He's based up in Manchester. I'm not sure what he does the rest of the week. Maybe he's doing some DIY as well, or living with the lizards. But he wrote this weekend on LinkedIn, the science is becoming clear. Lockdowns are no longer the right medicine. It's clear that COVID-19 is much more common than first assumed. The vast majority of people infected have mild symptoms or no symptoms. Researchers have tested for antibodies in general populations and reached the same conclusion. The number of people infected is many times higher than counted by the official statistics. Well, we also know the number of people who died is probably higher than the official statistics as well. But we don't know really, do we, exactly how many people have been infected because we haven't had reliable tests carried out across the entire population. We might actually have something on this, a sample of about 30,000 or so. I think the Office of National Statistics are working with Oxford University, I think. And over the next year, which is obviously way too late, they will have tested 300,000 people, which will be interesting for historians to look back on this moment. But as to working on the idea of whether we get back to work or not, the number of people who've been infected is quite important because it gives us an idea of the death rate from this thing. If lots of people have been infected, then obviously the lower the death rate. If very few people have been infected, but we've got the number of deaths we have, then the death rate is much higher. And the common argument is that it's only killing old people, so the rest of the population should be able to carry on as normal. But here are some numbers to think about, and it does get down to that tricky dilemma, saving the economy versus saving lives. Which one do we do? At what point do we say, nah, let's go for the economy? And conversely, at what point do we say, look, we're just going to have, the economy is going to have to take the hit because there's just too many people dying here. The fact is, the latest figures we have for excess deaths, in other words, the number of people who would normally die in a week versus the number of people who died in that week this year, is for the second week in April. It shows twice as many people died than would normally die. So that's pretty significant, isn't it? So getting back to life as normal is the other option, apart from, life as normal, apart from the dying part. So where do we draw the line? Well, there's an app, the COVID symptom tracker. I log onto it every day and say, look, I'm fine. Life is normal. If they'd asked, it would be nice if they'd asked how the DIY is getting on, but they don't. Just two simple questions. Are you showing any symptoms? Have you been tested? No and no is always my answer. But the COVID symptom tracker app reckons that at least 2 million people aged 20 to 69 had the virus in April. Now, they base that on asking people whether they got symptoms or not. There will be some people, a little psychosomatic or hypochondriacs, people who've got similar symptoms. And they're counting those amongst the 2 million. But anyway, let's accept that it's 2 million. In fact, let's be generous and say 3 million people have had it. Even with the lockdown, 3 million people in the UK, aged 20 to 69, have had the virus. And let's also be generous and say once you've had it, you can't get it again. The jury's out on that. But let's assume that's the case. Well, there's also numbers from the Office of National Statistics that shows up to the 17th of April, the vast majority of deaths were older people over 70. Only 12% were under that age. So we know that so far, close to 30,000 people have died from the virus. We're not quite there yet, but we will be in the next day or two, unless you're David Icke, of course, in which case 30,000 lives have been taken by shape-lifting aliens living underground, one of which might be the Queen. So 30,000 people, of which 12% are aged under 70, so that's 3,600 people of working age are dying from the coronavirus, when 3 million people might have been infected. That means the death rate from those infected in the under 70 population might be just 0.12%, which seems like nothing at all. So, you can see the argument. Let's get back to work. If you're under 70, the chances of you dying are very remote. So let's get back to saving the economy. Simples, isn't it? Just 0.12%. Why would we be concerned about that? If you want to put a number on it, though, that would mean of the 42 million people in that age group, which is 14 times the potential currently infected, that would mean over 50,000 extra working people would die. So is that worth the risk? Well, the Saturday Economist seems to think so. Perhaps, it's okay for him because he doesn't get out much during the week. Only works on Saturday. So the chance of him getting infected. Crazy people with guns launching protests in America seem to think so because they're destitute and they need the money, basically. But would we be happy to accept that? To get the economy moving, a 14-fold increase in deaths amongst the working age population. For you, if you're of that age, it would mean a 50% increase in the chance that you would die this year. 50% increase. Would you continue life as normal if you knew there was a 50% increase in the chance that you were going to die? Well, maybe you would, because in a normal year, 115,000 people aged 20 to 69 die out of 42 million. So normally you would have a 1 in 360 chance of dying. But with COVID-19 unchecked, if we believe, the rationale that I've just outlined based on 3 million people already being infected and a pretty low death rate, that would mean the chance of you dying would move from 1 in 360 to 1 in 250. Now, you might think that's worth the risk. Less, of course, if you are obese or asthmatic or you have a pre-existing condition, then those odds are going to be greatly increased. Like you, I'm allergic to shape-shifting reptilian creatures who are undoubtedly behind all of this. Actually, on that, we'll go back to these numbers in a second, but I mean, that's the question I want to put. If the chance of you dying increases by 50%, would you be happy to go back to work, given that it's a chance of 1 in 360 versus 1 in 250? What do you reckon? Is 50,000 extra people of working age dying worth it to save the economy? But let's get back to David Icke's conspiracy theory about why COVID-19 doesn't exist anyway. Apparently, it's all to do with doctors being paid to report on this non-existent COVID-19, apparently.
Medicare, this medical system in America, has determined that if you have a COVID-19 admission to the hospital, you'll get paid $13,000. If that COVID-19 patient goes on a ventilator, you'll get $39,000. But if you diagnose someone as a regular pneumonia, and this is what's been happening, regular pneumonia is being diagnosed COVID-19, it's where the figures are coming from. If you diagnose someone with a regular pneumonia from another cause, you get $4,600. So you can see there is this massive thousands and thousands of dollars incentive for every single individual that a hospital, a doctor, diagnoses as COVID-19.
Do you think he ever listens back to anything he said? Just so you can realise how crazy it is. Doctors are being paid basically to misreport COVID-19 because they'll get richer from it. It doesn't explain, of course, that's in the United States. It doesn't explain why so many are being diagnosed in China or Italy or Spain or France or the UK or just about everywhere else on the planet. Places where the death rate has shot up so much. It's just a very nasty case of pneumonia, apparently. Or maybe the aliens have started eating us, perhaps. Maybe they're ready to pounce. And it's all just a big conspiracy theory. Here's my problem with us getting back to work too quickly. Just going back to that 50,000 figure that I mentioned, that, maybe 50,000 people will have to die of working age. Of course, it might be less than that because there is this hope that at 70%, we'd get to herd immunity. In other words, so many of us would have it that, and we're not coming into contact with people who don't have it, that this virus has got nowhere to jump. It's left isolated and it dies out. So 70% of 50,000 dying would mean just 35,000 people of working age dying. But the thing is, we don't know that for sure. We don't know whether 3 million people have already been infected. So we have no idea of the real death rate. And we don't know whether, when you've had it once, whether you can get it again. There's evidence that maybe you can. So it's a big risk. We just don't know. More to the point, even if the government says, look, the economy is open, get back to work. We know many of us won't do that. We won't go to restaurants or jump on planes or do lots of shopping. As far as possible, we'll stay home. So the economy's not going to bounce back. It'll limp back into action. And if at the same time governments use that as the opportunity to pull their stimulus, like the furloughed workers allowance, people will be worse off. In fact, they'll be forced to go back to work. And I suspect if it's seen as negligence, lawyers are going to have a field day after this one, aren't they? Against the employers or against the government, whoever it is, force them to go back to work if they suffer as a consequence. Even if they don't die, maybe they just get a damaged lung from the pneumonia complications that come with it. But also, what about the over 70s? Do we just ignore them? Do we say, look, life is going to continue as normal? If you're over 70, you're still in lockdown. You can't go anywhere. If that was the case, we'd have the over 70s locked down. We'd still have this reservoir of infected people rather than 3 million of them. If that is how high it is now, maybe 40 million people infected, roaming around, working age people carrying the infection who are going to come into contact at some point with those over 70s. So how many of the over 70s are going to die? Their chance of coming into contact from this reservoir of infected people, many of them their relatives, and many of them, won't even know whether they got it or not. They'll say that they're just fine. The chance of people being in contact with infected people is going to be greatly enhanced. So more over 70s are going to die as well. So there are so many known unknowns. We really need to wait and see what the infection rate is so we know what the death rate is by age group before we can lift this lockdown. And we need to accept that the road out of the lockdown is going to be very slow indeed. There's no way the economy is going to bounce back. There's still people talking about this V-shaped curve, the idea that the economy has gone down one side of the V and it's going to jump back up to the other side and will be where we left off. That is like something that David Icke would come up with. But we also need to, obviously, we also need to ask people, how long is it going to take to get your house back into order, to finish off those DIY projects? Otherwise, there's going to be houses up and down the UK and around the world that are going to be left in a right old state. So we need plenty of notice. I hope Boris Johnson has been thinking all this through. And that's it. That's Balls Radio for today. We'll do another one soon, just so you know I'm still alive. I'm Phil Dobbie. See you soon.
Balls Radio.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!